Hello, and welcome to Ruben Uncut. Today I'm going to be talking about something in more of an abstract concept that I believe America needs to understand more. That is, what do left and right wing mean? Let's get into it. You hear about left and right wing a lot in contemporary society. They are constant buzzwords in the background of most political commentary. But what do left and right wing actually mean, and what do they stand for? Well, I'm here to tell you. So, first of all, there's a lot of political terms that you may have heard, and I'll be real, I did not get a degree in political science, so there are probably people out there who know more on this than me. I have done a lot of research into all things politics, and I took political classes in college whenever I possibly could use one to fill in one of my LERs. Something I highly recommend to those who wish to understand society. But let's get into it. As you may or may not be aware, the terms left and right wing first appeared during the French Revolution of 1789, when members of the National Assembly divided into supporters of the Ancien regime and to the president's right side, and supporters of the revolution on his left. Now, what does that ultimately mean, that right and left wing ultimately mean? And this is the important part, okay? Bear with me. Left and right wing refer to the spectrum between hierarchy and egalitarianism. So, what are these two opposite opposing concepts, you may ask? Well, it works pretty simply, actually. The further on the right that you go on the political spectrum, the further you are essentially encouraging hierarchy, with the extreme end of hierarchy being the idea of a unitary executive power who rules all the land, whether this be a fascist or a monarch. Those are essentially basically interchangeable. By the way, hierarchy is, of course, the idea that society is tiered, that some people are more important, more worthy, more deserving, and better than other people. Where have we heard that before? But anyways, over all the way to the left, we of course have egalitarianism. Egalitarianism is the idea that human beings all deserve some level of the same amount of dignity. Now, of course, the farthest end of egalitarianism would be some type of communist anarcho society where there is no central governance and everyone is equal because we have fully dismantled hierarchy. And this is the big thing. Right wing is ultimately the love of hierarchy, the belief that we should have a tiered system where some people are better than other people. The further to the right, the more you are going to believe this. The more to the left you go, the more you are going to believe in the egalitarian concept that human beings essentially deserve the same level of dignity and autonomy as everyone else. The further, of course, you go in hierarchy, the more debatable it becomes that people deserve things like autonomy. For those who are not familiar with the word autonomy, it means your control over your fucking self. In other words, freedom. Here's the reality. Right-wing belief systems are inherently moving away from freedom. Now, that doesn't mean just because you're right-wing that you hate the concept of freedom. However, the further you move towards right-wing beliefs, the more you are allowing for the concept that there are people in our society that do not deserve the same level of freedom. This is a basic fundamental flaw with this type of thinking, but I'm not here to condemn yet. We're going to get more into my opinions on right and left wing philosophies here in a minute. But now maybe here is the time to create some level of differentiation. Because after all, we, the society, exist in this way where we are hearing left and right wing all the time. And we don't really seem to understand what things are left or right wing, or what even centrism is. Now, I'm going to have some controversial takes on centrism, especially American centrism, which is, I'm sorry, you guys, you might be flat fuck the stupidest people on earth. You see, because the reality is that the average American centrist does not actually understand the left right dichotomy of egalitarianism versus hierarchy. Now, listen to me. I'm not saying that you have to full on believe in an anarcho communist system that we would get with total egalitarianism. And I'm not saying that if you're a little to the right, that you're instantly a fascist monarchist. I'm not saying that because the reality is that, and this is important, it is a spectrum. There is a spectrum on this thing. For example, you might believe that in basic equality, but you might still support the capitalist concept of certain levels of necessary hierarchy for functionality. You would then, that would definitionally put you somewhere in the betweens on the left and right spectrum, depending on how strongly you believed in each of those concepts. That does not inherently make you a bad person. It just means that you philosophically differ from people who are more to the left or more to the right of you on that spectrum. Because, and this is important, left and right wing, despite the name, this is important, left and right wing, despite the name, are not a binary. They are a spectrum. You exist somewhere along the spectrum. This is an important aspect to understand because people being left or right wing is very contextual and also individual. These things have got to be understood. Let's move along. In our society right now, we hear left and right wing, and almost anything that is Democrat is lumped into the left wing side of the spectrum. There is a problem with this, which is that it is inherently not true. A major problem with the United States political system is our obsession with the binary, the political binary. The political binary is a distraction, by the way. The reality is that left and right wing beliefs are more complex than a binary. That's literally why it's a spectrum. Left and right wing politics. We often in our society shove anything related to Democrats into the left wing and anything related to Republicans into the right wing. This is, however, not entirely fair. Take, for example, the term liberal. The term liberal literally just means generous or giving. In terms of political policy, it is a political policy that wants to give more to the people of its society. This is the basic fundamental understanding of liberal. Liberals, definitionally, almost always still support capitalism. And this is important because we think of them as being very left wing, but capitalism enforces hierarchy through the concept of ownership of capital. The more capital you own, the more hierarchy you deserve. That is the fundamental underlying concept of capitalism, or at least the way that we operate under it underneath our generally capitalist society. It's what allows the rich and powerful to rule us secretly from the shadows. But liberalism ultimately inherently believes in capitalism. Therefore, liberals are inherently not as far to the left as most people on the left. The average liberal still believes in a certain amount of egalitarian dignity for all people. However, they fundamentally also believe that capitalism has a place in society. This is what places them only slightly left of center, if not dead center. And you have to understand this. America's concept of center is fucked. Our Overton window is actually very far to the right. Actually, it has become increasingly more alarmingly farther to the right. And frankly, I don't like it. Don't like it. But let's get back to what I was saying. Let's break down conservative. That conservatives politically, this is another tricky one because conservative definitionally politically is in fact relative. Conservatism is the political belief in maintaining things that work. Now, this does mean that a lot of conservatives tend to lean into traditionalism, which is a brain disease. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to give out my opinions just yet. Let's get back to the facts. All right. But conservatives, essentially, that is technically should be the political belief in maintaining systems that function and work for your society. There's going to be a certain amount of alignment here with traditionalism, which inherently is the thing that pulls it closer to the right. And this is kind of important because it's also why the right is so fucked and why the left has trouble conveying itself to people, to the less educated portions of society. And also why the right doesn't really understand the left at all. Conservatism, essentially, theoretically, conservatives could endorse more egalitarian beliefs depending on how egalitarian the society they exist in previously has been established to be, which is why American conservatism has the constant sort of confusion over the role of freedom, because freedom is inherently an American traditional value. No, even if we haven't always applied it as well as we should have. The concept is something that we wrote into all of our documentation because we believed that that's what we were doing, even if we didn't necessarily give freedom to everybody right away. Freedom is still built into the American traditional concept, which is why American conservatism is a weird hybrid beast that has aligned itself with people who don't value freedom. The tricky and confusing part about these political values is that ultimately egalitarianism's greatest weakness is that it actually allows hierarchical thinking to exist. Now that's going to sound a little bit aggressive to some people. So let me be clear, I'm not automatically writing off all hierarchy here, but I do need to make you understand why this is sort of a paradoxical, incongruous concept for the right. The right has historic right-wing beliefs historically because they align with hierarchy, will always be at some level of odds with the idea of freedom. Now, the thing that is not understood about the left from the right's perspective is that left-wing thinking philosophically and values-wise is inherently open to the concept that there should be a free exchange of ideas. Now, I understand that conservatives don't believe that that is what the left believes in, but this is important, they do. These types of left-wing beliefs are what allow right-wing beliefs to exist inside the same society as left-wing beliefs. Now, you might say, Ruben, what about the Soviet Union or all them other communist uprisings? First of all, most of those, if you pay attention, failed to actually establish any of their left-wing structuring that would have been implied in left-wing philosophy, and instead went about constructing hierarchical systems that enforced status and tier systems in their society. They just did it, and frequently just did it with more authoritarianism. Now, there are a number of historical reasons why many of these regimes failed to live up to the standards and philosophical beliefs that they claim to have, but I'm not here to talk about that right now. We're talking purely in terms of the abstract philosophical concepts of left and right wing. You may have recently seen a clip where, forgetting the gentleman's name, but he was debating a series of right-wingers, one of whom openly declared himself a fascist, and also admitted that he was only using the existence of free speech until his side receives power, at which point they would end free speech.
Quick edit here during the editing process. Since I have the clip now, which I'm going to put on for you, I will say that he's I misremembered the clip a little bit. It wasn't freedom of speech they were talking about. It was democracy itself, which, in fairness, establishes the same point of the tolerance for right-wing beliefs is what allows right-wing beliefs to exist. Here's the clip.
How would Connor's America look? What would it look like?
Well, quite frankly, I think we would deport people who shouldn't be here.
No, I didn't ask about deporting. What does the government look like?
What does the government look like?
Yeah.
I would say, quite frankly, it's under a sort of benevolent leader, such as
Where does he
Franco.
come from?
It could be a kind of aristocratic class. Could be someone
who picks the autocrat?
Frankly, the people. I mean, we could hold a vote on it. Kings were
isn't that democracy?
Well, sure. You can have a vote to get to that stage.
And then no more votes afterwards?
Absolutely.
Wow.
100%.
Wow. And if that autocrat kills you and your family, you're fine with that?
Well, I'm not going to be a part of the group that he kills, because that's the whole thing.
How do you know?
Carl Schmitt
Autocrats tend to kill everyone,
Carl
even their own
Schmitt
supporters.
makes this point very well in his work. It's the friend-enemy distinction, right?
Carl
liberals,
Schmitt, the Nazi theoretician.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't care.
Are you a fan of the Nazis?
I frankly don't care being called a Nazi at all.
I didn't say that. I didn't actually say that. I said, are you a fan of the Nazis?
Well, they persecuted the church a little bit. I'm not a fan of that. But
what about the persecution of the Jews?
Well, I mean, I certainly don't support anyone's human dignity being assaulted. I'm a Catholic.
But you don't condemn Nazi persecution of the Jews?
I think that there was a little bit of persecution and stuff like that, which is bad.
We may have to rename this show because you're a little bit more than a far-right Republican.
Hey, what can I say?
I think you could say, I'm a fascist.
Yeah, I am.
You see, the thing is that many conservatives in America are very pro-free speech because free speech is a part of our national tradition. However, people who are on the right, who are more prone, people who are on the right, who are more prone to hierarchical thinking and not necessarily the traditional elements of America, use traditionalist conservatives to further their right-wing agenda. These traditionalist conservatives might strongly believe in free speech. However, their understanding of actual right-wing philosophy is so limited and poor that they fail to understand that this is the thing that always happens with right-wing philosophy and political theory, which is in every incident where right-wing power has come to play, a huge part of it has relied on the fact that conservatives in their belief in traditional values are easily swept up in the nostalgic emotion of fascism. This is just inherently true. It lines up with almost every rise of fascism. And in fact, these same techniques are often used now to support concepts of previous Soviet Union totalitarianism. Because the appeal to nostalgia is always strong, but it is also a big part of all fascism. Because fascism, this right-wing philosophy, is appealing to a sense of traditionalism. In that tradition, hierarchy. By appealing to this hierarchy, once again, they are essentially unintentionally aligning themselves with further right philosophies that they don't fully understand. Many conservatives in America are just decent, hardworking people who have a concept of traditional values drilled into their head, either from church or their parents or their limited understanding of the world. And that's okay. But the thing they don't understand is that their reliance on these traditionalist values also align them with literal fascists, because fascists will always appeal to this type of thing because, and this is where we get into it, let's talk about cultural left and right wingness. So here's the thing where it gets messy. You see, because of how the intersection of individualism in American politics. Individualism in the West is a big part of tradition. However, individualism, when expanded to its full philosophical elements, would always come back to being somewhat egalitarian. Right-wing individualism is the concept that there are individuals who are exceptional and therefore better than you. That is what right-wing individualism basically breaks down to philosophically. This is the stuff that Ayn Rand talked about. This is the stuff that Nietzsche talked about. This is the stuff that fascists talk about. Those two philosophers, by the way, are not inherently fascist, but they inspired plenty of fascists, because fascists like to hold up their rhetoric to support their own rhetoric, because that's what fascists fucking do. The reality is that individualism, when applied to freedom, though, also opens up yourself to what is essentially a very left-wing philosophy. If you believe that individualism is the idea that individuals have the right to be themselves in society, that is inherently a left-wing concept of individualism. And any argument on individualism would also have to support the concept of supporting the rights of people to be unique. Otherwise, you are inherently denying individualism in those individuals. This is why on the left, there is a constant push to recognize things like trans people, the LGBTQ community in general, and a great example here is Muslims. Now, the right likes to bring up that Muslims and left-wing beliefs do not necessarily coincide, and that's valid because they frequently do not. Don't get me wrong, and this is important, there are progressive Muslims in the world. Only 1% of the Muslim population is fundamentalist Muslim. There are plenty of other types of Muslims throughout the world, and Muslims, like Christianity, have a diversity of different philosophical and theological thought. Liberals do not stand up for Muslims because liberals and Muslim beliefs align philosophically. They stand up for Muslims because they recognize the Muslim right to exist. This is going back to the thing that I was talking about. You see, there's a fundamental thing that conservatives don't seem to understand about liberals. And I have a clip here that I think will illustrate that. Let's take a look at this conservative meme. I didn't really need the sound for that, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, but let me read this for the people who might just be listening while doing something else. The meme reads, kind of funny that our president has 5 kids, 3 baby mamas, lives in government housing, has an immigrant wife, and they still don't like him. It's an interesting meme. And it's an interesting meme because it really points out some of the weird elements of what I would describe the conservative perspective. For starters, this meme could easily be a liberal meme with one adjustment. Instead of saying they still don't like him, liberal would say the exact same things and then say, and they still like him. Because the thing you have to understand is that this is actually the thing that right-wing people don't understand about left-wing philosophy. You see, most right-wing people get turned off by left-wing people because what they are experiencing is left-wing passion, where they get overly animated and emotional and essentially lash out at them individually. However, the reality is that liberals typically are not thinking in the same sort of boxing people into a category way, because that is inherently hierarchical thinking. You see, because the thing about the meme that is funny to me is it illustrates a failure of understanding. The meme implies that these are things that liberals like, but that's not actually accurate. These aren't things that liberals like. Let's go through the various claims, and I'll tell you how they're not things that people on the left or liberals like. President having a lot of kids. First of all, liberals don't mind that people have a lot of kids. The president has 5 kids from 3 baby mamas. Let's talk about that for starters. For starters, it is a misunderstanding that the left supports the idea of having 5 kids from 3 different baby mamas. That's not inherently a good or bad thing, due to the fact that a left-wing or liberal mindset to that statement would be, well, what were the circumstances that led to those life choices? That is the inherent left-wing way to approach something like that. The meme, however, implies a misunderstanding that this is something liberals inherently support. But that's not true. What it actually is that left-wing people have compassion for people who might have ended up in those situations because of difficult life experiences. Donald Trump is a rich, spoiled bitch, so he we don't really have compassion for the fact that he has 5 kids with 3 baby mamas. That being said, on a certain level, we also don't entirely care. After all, he had his first wife died, and then he had a divorce. These are normal life experiences that occur. Liberals don't necessarily like these things, but there are things that liberals are willing to accept are things that happen to people. The reason that however, the left-wing or liberal perspective on this is essentially that those are things conservatives actively put into the media as being actively bad. We are constantly told from the right that people having a bunch of kids from different baby mamas is why people are fucking poor. Don't get me wrong, having kids is not an economic step up in our society. It's a major drag on you economically. It does, however, make you a strong participant in capitalism and help support the overall economic system. But it will not make you yourself as an individual very rich. But the point is that liberals don't like those things. We acknowledge why they happen in society. That's not the same thing. However, right-wing media constantly puts out that those things are bad and what's wrong with you as an individual. Donald Trump lives in government housing. Ha 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 ha, although technically true. Now this is the thing. Liberals and left-wing people don't want you to live in government housing. They want government housing to be available to those who need it. It's not the same concept. We don't automatically love people for living in government housing, just that we think that that is a service that should be available to the people that fucking need it. Has an immigrant wife. Once again, this comes down to left-wing individualism. Left-wing people do not inherently like or dislike a person for being an immigrant or being an immigrant married to an American. We just view those people as other people who, just happen to be immigrants. However, the right-wing media constantly barrages us with the idea that immigrants are bad and immigrant wives are just gold diggers here to get a green card. When left-wing people defend the idea of people being immigrants married to Americans, we are defending them as individuals. We are not inherently saying that this is good or bad behavior. We're just saying it's a thing people do. You see, because that's the thing, is that many cultural left-wing expression comes out in the idea that people should be allowed to be themselves, and that life has many different circumstances that causes people to be who they are and where they are in society. While right-wing philosophy dictates that you are bad, that people have failings, and that's why bad things happen to them. These are the fundamental different dichotomies. The irony of this, of course, is that this causes that left-wing philosophy inherently allows for right-wing thought to exist, because we inherently can't suppress it because of our belief in individual freedom. Now, there are new philosophical arguments that we can put forward as to why that could be problematic overall. After all, the issue with democracy is that democracy allows for the existence of anti-democracy. And anti-democracy, if it were to gain too much power or influence, risks undermining the system and throwing your own society into chaos and possible violence. Which is probably why Peter Thiel wants to keep us all locked in our echo chambers, being fed bullshit through social media, so that he can slowly undermine democracy. By the way, Peter Thiel actively hates democracy. And if I'm the first person telling you this, I am deeply sorry. Left and right wing also apply differently to corporations, and power structures. Right-wing political sentiment constantly tells us to essentially release the chains that regulate large corporations or power structures. Please check out my video on understanding power for more on power structures. But essentially, and this is the thing that's hard for people to understand, on a certain level, once scaled for power and also general market size, there is no fundamental difference between the things I am about to list to you. Governments, businesses, religions, royalty, and corporations. These are essentially all the same thing, and that same thing is power structures. Structures of power, the things that allocate resources and the basic functions of society. Right-wing philosophy and right-wing political sentiment in the United States is inherently asking us to restrict power structures less, which is a deeply questionable concept because power structures inherently can all become the thing that we are told to fear, the government. The government is just the final stage of any power structure. A corporation, a religion, these things can all gain enough power to essentially rule countries. It's just a matter of, do you let them? The government has incentive, of course, to prevent that from happening, but they also have incentive to claw back as much power from the federal government as they possibly can. Currently, the right wing is made up of a couple of different organizations, religious and, of course, technocratic. It's ironic because the religious people have constantly been afraid of the technocrats, however, have started to side with the technocrats under Trump. That's weird, right? Right? Those are topics for a different video. I just need you to understand left and right wing for right now. Left-wing philosophy currently is based around limiting the abilities of power structures. Why? Because power structures inherently control and regulate the individual, which is inherently an appeal to hierarchy. Left-wing philosophy indicates that we need to regulate these power structures and make sure that they are not gaining too much power in our society to where they become a detriment to the people living in that society. Left-wing philosophy also indicates that we should have as much freedom as possible for the individual to be themselves and exist in society. The further to the left you go, the more that is believed in. However, right-wing philosophy actually suggests the opposite, essentially is the mirror image of this, where we are freeing the power structures from our regulations and rules that chain them in our society and prevent them from gaining too much power. While at the same time, this is important, regulating the individual. All right-wing philosophy leans towards regulation of the individual in the society, and that this is inherently the way to go about it. This is also known as social conservatism, although a more appropriate term for it would be socially right-wing. We do call it socially conservatism, though, because on a certain level, there have always been a certain number of conservatives who have wanted to pull us back towards the monarchy, definitionally, as that is the tradition that predates our democracy. And before anyone jumps into the comments and says we're a representative republic, that's a type of democracy, dumbass. It's a type of democracy. You're putting a hat on a hat. You're trying to tell me that my hero is not a sandwich. And by that I mean a hero sandwich. Anyways, this is where social conservatism comes in, though. Social conservatism is the idea that at a certain level, everything should be that everything breaks down to how the individual behaves and those individual behaviors. Now, there is a certain amount of truth on this. In fact, left-wing beliefs sort of coincide with this. After all, in left-wing beliefs, the only thing you can judge another person for is their behavior. Now, the thing is that left-wing people will tend to enforce this not with governmental standards or laws, but with basic social pressures, essentially being rude, ignoring, or canceling. Side note, You can only truly be canceled by your fans. Because as long as you have fans, you can't be canceled. That's the secret formula, by the way. If you hadn't noticed, all the people who have been canceled repeatedly still have fans. It doesn't matter. Sometimes it does not fucking matter what you do. As long as you have fans, you cannot be canceled. But I'm not here to talk about that. The point is that the left-wing belief is that more in a societal or social pressure. You think like that? I don't like that. Or just people generally expressing their disgust with your overall belief or behavior. On the right, however, there is always a constant push to regulate this behavior with the government. Immigrants and Black people are violent. We got to put more police on them. What about solving the social and economic structuring issues that tend to result or be the root cause of these societal behaviors? No, fuck that. They had a choice between being a criminal and starving to death and being a good person, and they should have starved to death and been a good person. Or whatever other threat that caused them to lean into criminality. That's not what I'm talking. That hunger is just an example and a basic human need. The right-wing philosophy is, of course, to regulate the behavior, force people to change, force people to conform, always make it through shows of power. Now, to be fair, religious power actually looks very similar to the left-wing way of like socially stigmatizing bad behavior. So there is a little bit of confluence there, sort of like it's an interesting philosophical juxtaposition, but ultimately that can't kill you. And this is what's important. What is legally put into your society is significantly more important than if people are being a dick to you on Twitter. I'm sorry, it just is, and it always will be. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that bullying is okay. I'm not saying that internet pylons are good. These things are not. However, they're also not inherently left or right-wing things. The reality is that history will show us that scandals ruin people's lives. And they always have. And a part of that has been social stigmatization. However, until the internet was invented, the amount of effort it took for a standard individual in society to actually get their thoughts heard on the topic was a lot more effort than most people were willing to put into it. You had to write a book or a letter or something. But now you can put out your questionably thought out idea on the internet in a matter of seconds. That's really what's changed. We're not more sensitive. People have always been sensitive. Bitch, we used to duel in the street over honor. Side note, any appeal to honor is basically something you are offended by. These are the basic things you need to understand about left and right wing. To conclude, left wing means egalitarianism. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're an egalitarian, but it means that your philosophy is going to stray more towards the egalitarian. And in the egalitarian, the individual has the highest level of freedom and the highest level of protection. However, there is going to automatically be a distrust of any level of power structure. The further you go to the right, you are going to find a couple of interesting things. Essentially, the further you move to the right, the less consideration there is for the individual and the more preference there is to power structure. However, depending on what flavor of right wing you are, your opinion on what that power structure should be can pretty radically vary, even though on a base level, power structures are only superficially different philosophically or in terms of function. At the end of the day, they are all doing the same thing, which is regulating power through goods and services. You really should watch that. You really should watch that video about power structures that I made, Understanding Power. Check that out. So to continue my wrap up, right-wing Right-wing philosophy is always going to lean towards the concept of giving power to hierarchy. Whoever is at the top of your power structure, that is who is ultimately in charge and should be listened to at all times, while the individual should be happy to just conform to society and exist with inside that thing. Hopefully that society is based around the values and beliefs that are already intrinsic to you as an individual. So, left wing, power structures bad, individual good. Right wing, power structures good, provided they align with my beliefs, individual good, as long as they conform to my philosophies and the power structure. This is the inherent essential difference of left and right wing theory. Now you know. Try to think about your beliefs and how they align along this spectrum. Like I said, you don't have to fully be left or fully be right. Fun fact, the thing I forgot to mention here was about the Overton window. You see, because the true neutral, the true center, if we were going to look at political philosophy and how they actually deviate from each other, the true center would be social democracy. I'm a democratic socialist, which is further to the left than a social democrat, to be clear. But social democracy would be the center compromise. It would give the greatest allowance of freedom to the individual, while also having power structures that enforce that concept, while at the same time having regulations that control other power structures, while at the same time still allowing for capitalism, which means allowing individuals to develop some level of their own sub-power structure. However, in America, we have been taught that social democracy is a left-wing socialist concept, but it's not. It's literally pro-capitalism, but also pro-individual and taking care of those individuals in your society. Americocentrism is, in fact, just a bunch of chicken-shitted brain eaters who don't know what the fuck they're talking about 90% of the time, because they will often say things like, hey guys, can't we all just get along? When one side is saying, hey, black people are terrible. And like, what is the compromise on black people are terrible? There's no compromise on that. Or, hey, poor people are terrible. There's no compromise on poor people are terrible. What are you talking about?
Okay. Another edit here. I need to add some context to those things so that context is not taken out. To be clear, those were my examples of terrible right-wing arguments that we can't compromise with. There is no compromising with racism. There is no compromising with classism. You can't compromise. I just want to be clear. That's what I was saying there. And that those opinions I was saying were meant to be the negative arguments that I'm against. When I was watching it during the edit, I was like, I should make that clear. I didn't feel like it was clear. If you thought it was clear, thank you.
It's silly to think that there is some level of compromise with these philosophies inherently. You're welcome, centrists. I hope that I have helped you to understand left and right wing as a spectrum a little bit more. In the meantime, I'm just going to say that I ask that you please like and subscribe, comment, ring that bell. Because right now, the internet's algorithms are not helping me out. So please do whatever you can to do that. All right, you can email the program at rubenuncut@gmail.com. Have a wonderful whatever, wherever, whoever you are.